Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of the Conway Daily Sun, and my two guests today are Ray Leavitt, who's the former Center Conway Fire Chief, and John Eastman, who's the current town manager. Greetings, guys.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah.
So we're going to get into this really convoluted subject of ambulance services.
Yeah.
And I was saying before we went on the air, I follow the news and I don't get it.
Yep.
So maybe Ray, explain, because what's in the news now is that you are now chairing this new committee, Ambulance Emergency Service.
Ambulance Response Committee.
Ambulance Response Committee, so that's looking into the town, which we're talking to. Meanwhile, and so we got these other stories in the news with the precinct, the Conway precinct, dissolving January 1, which means their fire and rescue go to the town of Conway. And then North Conway, out of the blue, precinct is now exploring to get away from, I guess, the private ambulance service and start their own. So first, explain where we where we are with ambulance services. How many do we have?
So there are two ambulance services. Right now, Conway Village Ambulance Service and Action Ambulance Service, which is a private entity. It was set up years ago. 447 Exchange was Conway Village that covered that area. 356 was, at that time, North Conway Ambulance Service, which has then been sold and convoluted now to Action Ambulance Service. Okay,
so that's the one that's, the town of Conway, and that includes the non-precinct areas too, is serviced by two, now the Conway Village precinct, which had their own rescue service?
Correct.
But not private, but it's
a public.
The public.
Right.
That's gone away.
Well, as of the first of the year, the town of Conway will absorb what was the precinct.
Okay, so within that, John, there are two private ambulance services that service the town of Conway?
Well, there's, when Conway Village comes to the town of Conway, they will continue to service the exact same location as they were when they were under contract, which is, I'm going to say former so people know, formerly the Conway Village Fire District and non-precinct, which is things like Route 153, up the west side to Birch Hill.
Okay.
And as Ray said, back when, and Ray was a selectman and Earl Sires was a town manager, where they differentiated the line was just based on it wasn't scientific. It was wherever 447 ended of Conway and 356 picked up, that's what North Conway. But so they're going to continue the non-precinct, which is also Center Conway. Action Ambulance right now does everything that is in the North Conway precinct, and they also continue to do Redstone and East Conway Road. Now granted, Redstone Fire Department has merged with Center Conway, and East Conway is merging with Center Conway. Traditionally, because that is part of the Center Conway, we could say that our ambulance will now do that, but we're not going to do that because we're under contract, and I think Ray will agree. It keeps it, the coverage area, it stays the same. The difference is you're now going to see the ambulance that was out here. The town of Conway would contract, the town of Conway would pay Action Ambulance money, and the town of Conway would pay Conway Village money. Now, we're taking ambulance and putting that into the operating budget because everybody pays for ambulance, whether it's North Conway or Conway.
Okay, so as of January 1, for the Conway world, like the Action Ambulance, is that the one on Redstone?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay, so that's the building everybody sees next to Johnson Auto and all that, right?
Yep.
So when Conway Village goes away, they're not going to have any of their own ambulance service, except for North Conway. The rest of the town is going to be covered by private ambulance services.
No. So the private ambulance service will be still North Conway, basically Redstone, and East Conway. Conway
Town
proper, municipal, we'll
Right.
call it municipal, will cover, as John said, Pleasant Street, 153, to the Albany town line on 16. And then they also have a contract to cover Albany as well as actually some parts of Madison that they cover.
I think I remember I think that we did not a funny story, but a kind of a crazy story about something with the adult center. That there was like a demarcation line there? Or
So
like,
that was, yeah. So they
fire.
Yeah, so that had to do with fire. But
okay.
So it became somewhat complicated as you, so like halfway up the driveway, would have been Conway Village, and then from there out through was Center Conway, which that made no sense because, you called 911, where are you?
Okay.
So we ended up doing a boundary adjustment. So basically, the entrance of that towards Center Conway is now in Center Conway. Conway Ambulance will still come out to pick up the people, but we go as
Right.
part of the rest.
So why isn't, I know you can't speak for the North Conway Precinct Commissioners, but why are they even looking into taking it back or getting out of the private business?
So I think what spurred this whole thing was because Conway town is absorbing Conway Village. It made sense to look at how we handled the ambulance service for the town. My sense is it makes much more sense for the town, as a town, to cover the whole town. It's cleaner financially. The very first meeting that we had, I asked the folks that were there representing North Conway if they had an intention within the next 3-4 years or whatever. And they said it was possible. They didn't say it was going to happen.
Right.
Like next year. So we were assuming that things were going to stay the same, and so we went down that road of planning for Conway to take over the whole town.
The whole town?
The whole
Right,
town.
so when North Conway Precinct talking among themselves about being public, they mean being public, being the part of the whole town, or just the precinct?
So basically taking over what Action is covering now. So it would be North Conway, Redstone, and East Conway proper.
But does that mean, John, that I guess I'm not clear about this. Does that mean if they went public, they would fold the North Conway Precinct area would fold into the town of Conway?
No,
too?
no, not at all. So, to Ray's point, there's a couple of things that, and I'm not an expert on the North Conway Fire District Water Precinct, but I will say this: they would have to change their charter to have an ambulance.
Well,
or somewhat.
I kind of that may not be the case because they used to run an ambulance. So there is so they do have. I went to the meeting they had the other night. They are asking for a legal opinion as to whether it is justified for them where they did do it, if they can do it under their charter. And I would say that there's probably a 90% chance that they can.
I mean, if they did it before, it would seem logical.
Yeah.
And the voters ultimately would decide anyways, because I read the paper today, and what it said is that if North Conway did it, they would just. That's not one thing that is for sure. If North Conway had an ambulance, they could do is they could cover their precinct. That doesn't necessarily mean, and it doesn't mean that it couldn't or that it can't, that they would automatically just move into Action's place. That would be up to the voters. So again, there hasn't been enough information, I will tell you, just from observing Ray and how he has run the committee, which has been very well done. There are community members on there that I had never met until the first meeting, and people who are very in touch with ambulance and how these things work. We did do an exercise, if Ray doesn't mind me talking about. Ray asked, as the chairman, which I thought was a great exercise, because this contract isn't up until the end of 2026.
The town contract.
The town contract and also with Action Ambulance. So on January 1 of 27, we need to either have a new contract or we need to be townwide ambulance, or there's some scenarios. We can continue to do it like we're doing it now, which is a hybrid, which I believe what Ray just said, and I concur. I'm not sure that that's really the way to go. The town could do the whole thing, and we could come up with a price, which we have, or you could privatize ambulance for the whole town, which means...
and to kind of interject on that, very early on in the committee, we basically said we didn't want any part of a private ambulance service covering the whole town as a committee.
Why is that?
Because there's a disconnect with the people that, and I'm not saying that Action people, don't do a good job. But there's a certain sense of community members being a part of the ambulance service, the familiarity of the patient.
Sure.
So there's a little comfort level. The other part is local knowledge. As recently as the day before yesterday, the Action Ambulance Service, because they're not from the area, relying on GPS, they weren't where they needed to be. And in the
The
world
accident on Potter Road?
No. It was something that was
Okay.
off West Side Road. The fire chief, which was Chad, said, "Well, look for me in the big yellow jacket, and you'll find where we are."
Yeah.
So that plays into it because obviously time is of the essence when we're
Sure.
dealing with stuff like that. So, like I said, the local knowledge is important.
Isn't it obvious, and the next question for you, Ray, is like, what is your charge with the committee? I mean, outside of coming up with these scenarios, and John, you just laid them out pretty succinctly, but isn't it obvious that we should just have one entity covering the whole town? And we're not exactly New York City here.
Yeah.
I mean, this is the same argument that says we all should have combined fire. And all.
You and I are on this. You and I are on the same page.
I think you're right. Although you got to listen to North Conway as well. They're a separate entity. They can do essentially what they want to do. What is that term? Imitation is the greatest form of flattery.
Yeah.
And they want to have essentially the same thing that Conway has, which I've worked with all of them over the years, and I can tell you that Conway provides a pretty good service. I will also tell you that North Conway Fire Department Rescue is equally as good. Mm-hmm. And again, not to say that Action doesn't do a fairly decent job.
Right.
To a certain extent, it depends on who's there on the day. There are some stronger people,
Sure,
than not.
So go ahead.
The other thing too is, you never want to put a price on life, but as you know, Mark, and you've covered this town for 40 years, and we've all been around a long time, is the voters have different opinions of what they want. Some want to see the best service, which is ALS. Some want to see the best price.
What's ALS?
So ALS is, there's basically basic form, which is you're just supporting what you got. In other words, you can give oxygen, you can do, vitals. That's pretty much it.
EMT.
And then
You're
EMT.
talking about the service, the actual delivered service.
What you're delivering for service.
Okay.
So, and bus them to the hospital. When you go to ALS, so starting with the advanced level EMT, which that's what I am, I'm able to give some cardiac medications, some breathing medications, as well as some airway stuff. And then you go to the paramedic level, which is still a part of the ALS level. Then they can give narcotics and they can do rapid innovation, which is helpful. So those are probably more life-sustaining skills than just
What are
putting
we
them in the truck.
providing now?
So the reality is we're at ALS level, even with
Because
Action.
you have individuals like you who are answering the calls?
Yep. And Action does too. I mean, 99% of the time they're at ALS level, even though the contract, and the same thing with Conway Village, it was at the basic level because people didn't want to spend money.
And the difference too is the people, when it was a village district, the village district actually threw in more money. They threw in more, like the town, I'll give you an example. The town, if they were going to stay the precinct this year, we would be giving Conway Village $200,000. We'd be giving Action $169,000 just because of the area. So let's just say you're looking at just under $400,000 that the taxpayers, you and Ray and people who would pay. The ambulance budget, and I separated them. The Conway Village ambulance and fire was all mixed in together. So it was hard to tell what are we using this for, because you have to cost it out. Because if it's fire, not everybody pays Conway Village for fire. So we had to cost it out. I broke it out. This year's ambulance budget is about $940,000 compared to us paying $400,000. But the caveat to that is that us taking it over, not only does the cost go up because the Conway Village district was subsidizing, they were throwing in an extra $150,000, $160,000 because they wanted the ALS. But the non-precinct areas still got that same service. They weren't paying anymore. So we're going to redistribute that. But the upside is now that Conway Village is dissolving and it's becoming Conway, the town of, we also get to take advantage of the revenues, the ambulance billing, which is about the average is about $325,000. We also get to take advantage of the revenues that they charge Albany. So the projected revenues for 2025 on a $950,000 budget is about $480,000. So when people look at here and go, oh my goodness, that's way up. You know, when I submitted my original budget to the Board of Selectmen, I had separated ambulance out because I didn't want people to get confused. I later took it back and put it back in because everybody was paying for it, so I believe that you make it part of the operating budget and then you make your but before I put that in, our town budget was 2.37% for 2025, which is really good because the average as of November, the CPI number is 3.1, so we were under inflation. When we put Conway Village Ambulance into the operating budget, the overall budget goes to 6.5. It goes up 4 points. But I remind people, while you're shocked with that,
Right.
remember we're bringing in almost $500,000 to negate that, which goes into fund balance, which can go to help.
And I'd point out too, municipal services across the state tend to charge way less for transport. So, like Conway Village, I believe it's around $1,200.
Yeah, and it's the fourth cheapest in the state.
So there is room to increase that. And I'd asked Phil Remington to, when he looked at revenue, to look at like at a 15% increase, and that would bring them still on the lower third of
Ambulance
charging.
billing.
Yeah,
Ambulance
ambulance
billing.
bill. Whereas Action is like the fourth highest in the state. So.
Wow.
I think theirs was like 32.
Yes. So if you were to get hurt, Mark, in Conway,
Yeah.
the bill, you have insurance, but the bill, as Ray says, you might get a bill. Let's just say it's apples to apples. You don't have insurance. You're getting a bill for $1,200, or if you get hurt here at the Sun and you get, and again, distance, it's all the same. Let's just say that it's a 4-mile ride from Conway and a 4-mile ride. So to make everything equal, you get a bill for $3,200. Wow. So that's the difference. There's a lot of room in ambulance billing to go up, not substantially, but enough where it brings in more revenue. And again, it hasn't been been looked at.
So the bottom line, this is already confusing.
Yes, it is.
I'm gonna have to watch the show twice just to understand what you guys said. But the bottom line is going into this year is that Conway Precinct goes away. The budget's not going to change. Even though we're 900,000, but you get the offset revenue, so that taxpayers should be fine. In terms of the service, is everybody going to be ALS? I mean, if Conway Village was ALS and some of North Conway is not, can you confidently?
It's going to stay the same, which will essentially be ALS that you're getting.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what is your goal? Do you have a goal with the committee, or I know your charge is to what?
So our charge is just to look at it and then make a recommendation back to the selectmen as to where we're going, which I'm hoping on Tuesday we're going to have some sense of where we're going on this. My personal feeling is for a town-wide system.
What you mean town-wide? You got to convince
Ambulance.
North Conway, though.
No.
Yes.
When you say
well,
town-wide, are you including North Conway?
I am not at this point.
Okay, so
I will let North Conway make their presentation to the committee on Tuesday. I will say that there are some merits to what they're saying. I looked at they presented me their budget. But I think at the end of the day, the general population is going to look at what is it going to cost me per thousand. I believe, and I'm not in the town office doing this, but in looking at stuff, I'm going to say that for the town of Conway to cover the whole town would be roughly around 28 cents per thousand.
Something like that. It's
close.
It's 1.5 million. So if you take 900,000 or 950, we had the chief do a breakdown. for 2025. We can't do it for 27 because you can't project out that with inflation. It's right around 1.5 million for an in-house, and that's the entire town, Mark. And one last thing I would say, if the town of Conway did it, and people say, well, 1.5 million, you went from 900 to 1.5. But what they have to understand on 1.5 million is you're going to have ambulance billing for the whole town. So the average for Conway is anywhere between 325 and 350,000. Well, it's more than that in North Conway. So let's just say we kept it low, it's 350 and 350. The town's going to bring in $700,000 in billing. So the tax impact would be about 850,000 if you were to go private for the whole town, because they're for profit. And we're not, I agree with Ray. Action has served us well, and I had a meeting with John Hatch this morning, their representative. But at the end of the day, you know, for apples to apples in ALS, they're looking at somewhere at 3.2 million.
Yeah, I mean, obviously.
And they get to keep the revenues as well. That doesn't go back to the town.
Yeah, and so the other part of that too is there's no guarantee because you have to go out for contract bid.
For bid, yes.
So there's no
It
guarantee.
could be lower.
Well, it could be lower, but it could not necessarily be Action as well.
That's correct.
It could be another entity, you know, AMR or somebody else that could bid.
But doesn't it make sense? I mean, you just went through about Conway Village, the offsetting revenues. I mean, if the town took over North Conway, it'd be the same thing as what you just implied. So it doesn't seem like it should cost more money since we're already all these pieces are already providing the services now. Right. So it doesn't automatically mean, but that leads to the next question, that if and why is, you know, why would I don't understand, I know North Conway, and you know, our little taxpayers up here, we have no choice, we just write the checks. But it just seems like they would want to be part of the town, not to have that responsibility. But number one, and you can't answer that, but the other thing is that if it's town-wide, if the town takes over, who employs all these people? The town of Conway?
They will.
And you have to buy ambulances and all that stuff?
Well, we have two. We have to buy one, and we're going to buy one no matter what in 2026. It's on the capital reserve. It's on the plan. The backup number 2 that they have right now would become the number 3 backup. And I don't want to spoil, but I'll say this in general terms because Ray, as the chairman, had asked me to do a little bit of homework. And I will just say this. Ray had asked me to look into towns and small cities here in New Hampshire and what are they offering ALS, what's their 911 out the door, and the average, I'll just say without saying the average, and that even has to do with Concord and Portsmouth and all, the average ambulances that they have ready to go is only 3. When we had our meeting, there was talk about 4 or 5.
Oh, really?
And in Concord alone, they have 3, and the bulk of the towns, and when I say small cities, because you're talking Portsmouth, Dover, you can't count Rochester because Rochester does not, their EMS is like, it's like a private. They come according to Chief Remington, so we couldn't get numbers for that. But when you look at that, is that Conway, with a population of 10, 11,000 people, we know the transient population that comes in on any given time could be, on the weekend, could be 30, 40,000. But still, that's within the margin of error when you have the city of Concord only has 3 ambulances and they have been able to cover the entire city. I think we could cover, humbly I say that, I think the town of Conway could cover this whole entire town with 3 ambulances.
How many do we have now? I mean, there's one in Conway Village, right?
We have 2
in
Conway Village, and Action has 2. They have 1, plus they have a backup. And again, there has been talks. I'm not an expert. Ray is. That's why he's here. but there has been talk at the committee level, or there had been suggestions from people who sat in the audience that Ray allowed to speak that said, you know, I think we need 4 or 5 ambulances, which drives the cost. So back to your point, we already have 2. The town of Conway, now it's going from the village, not in 25, but in 26, we will purchase another one.
Okay, so the 2 existing now in Conway Village, are they going to stay there?
Yes.
Are they just going to operate under there? So when we get to next month, January 1, nothing has really changed in terms of service as far as 2 down there, 2 in a private in Redstone, life goes on.
Yes.
And are those Redstone ones, is that the ones that North Conway uses too? Those same ones. So the town of Conway is paying what is it, Action you said?
Action.
Action, and North Conway's paying Action.
No.
Nope,
no,
North Conway
no.
isn't.
Well, who are they paying?
North
then-
Conway is not paying anybody.
So they did this in order to.
I know.
The way they did this was to allow the distribution of the funding to be across the whole town. The way they've set this whole up. So
Wait a minute. Why isn't North Conway paying anybody?
Well, the people of North Conway are
Yeah.
paying. They're paying in their tax bill because remember, everybody pays for ambulance service based on per thousand where you are. So the district people, I mean, you're part
Yep.
of your taxes here. You pay the town of Conway for ambulance service for North Conway, and we send Action Ambulance a check. That's how it works. So your ambulance billing, which is different than fire because that's based on precincts, your ambulance, because we have ambulance for the entire town, is you get billed, you send in your taxes, when you send it to the town of Conway, we redistribute the money to the contracted ambulance for here, which covers all of North Conway.
Yeah, but
So-
the precinct, when I get a precinct bill here, it's just a precinct bill, right? I pay $5, whatever it is. None of that money that goes to the precinct goes to the ambulance?
no.
Okay.
Right, because that's fire, water, sewer,
Yeah.
obviously.
Yeah.
Water,
Unless up till December 31st of this year, unless you lived in Conway Village, then you subsidized
subsidized, yeah,
what
yeah.
what was there to pretty healthy amount.
Okay, so we have 5 minutes left.
Yeah.
We could talk about this for
Oh, yeah,
3
it's-
hours.
yeah.
So what's going on the warrant this year having to do with the town warrant, having to do with ambulances? Anything?
So I think what we're looking to do is a non-binding kind of a questionnaire. We're going to come forward as a committee to the selectmen, and then the selectmen will formulate a non-binding thing that said, do you want to go in this direction? Which would be just an assumption.
What are you going to recommend?
I
Well, the
can't
committee's
speak
not
for-
done yet. Okay, you
Yeah,
can
the
speak
committee's
for
not done,
yourself.
right. I guess at this point I'm going to say I would submit that we should do a town-wide system,
Not private.
not private.
What do you think?
Oh, I concur because just the pricing alone, as I said, people look at service, but if we make the service all the same, pricing is surely going to rule the day,
And
in my opinion,
And
for the tax base.
one thing
It's
I want
much
to point
cheaper.
out is there will be an ambulance in North Conway,
Yes,
so they won't all come out of Conway
right.
Village.
If we have townwide ambulance, all three of them won't be sitting in Conway,
Yeah.
and you have to go all the way up. But we'll have a staging area up
But
here.
now there's not one here. There's not an ambulance here because
Not
they're
in North
on
Conway.
Redstone.
Right.
Right, they're in Redstone.
Yep.
Wow. So, and why wouldn't that? I mean, that just makes obvious sense. So, who's going to object? I mean, outside of North Conway precinct.
Well, they might not object either. When I went to that meeting the other night, their projection was, I think, 90 cents a thousand for North Conway to do their own ambulance service. But that was with 2 ambulances and 9 full-time people.
Why would they even want to do that? I mean, why even take on that responsibility if you're North Conway precinct?
Part of it's pride, I think. They produce a very good product as far as ALS or
Yeah.
medical thing. And frankly, local control.
Local precinct control.
Yeah, local
Yeah.
control.
I mean,
yeah.
there's local, and then there's
Yeah.
local.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and in startup, again, I'm not an expert, but I know startup is
That's
when you
a-
buy 2 ambulances and staff it, you're
And
looking at
equipment.
$3 to $3.5 million.
Yeah.
That would come from the precinct.
Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Taxpayers.
in one weird way, if the precinct North Conway did its own, it would save town of Conway some money. I mean, it wouldn't help the North Conway precinct people.
Yeah,
No,
No.
you're right.
Yeah, it would be, I guess, sort of the elephant in the room type of thing is if North Conway was to do their own thing, like I said, they're saying it's 90 cents per thousand. If they were still to cover Redstone and East Conway, which they would do now, because of Center Conway and Redstone and East Conway merging as one, it would be a very complicated funding procedure to handle that.
And I suspect that might look different
Yeah.
from the selectmen's point of view. Right now, Redstone and East Conway is now part of Center Conway, and it's best to just leave it alone and let the contract work out. But it officially will be part of Center Conway, and only the town of Conway has, no other ambulance service can go outside without the permission of the town of Conway. So it would have to be by the Board of Selectmen and that. So Ray is correct. It's complicated, and I think that, I believe, you know, from observing the committee, I think they're all committed to trying to say what makes most sense. And you have said this. There's a lot of people every budget committee year, and I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole, but we get asked, why aren't we doing townwide fire?
Right,
and why
right,
aren't we
right.
doing this? And my answer is, I don't know. Great idea, because we're not New York City, we're not the Bronx, we're not the Queens, we're not Long Island, and you wonder, we have one police department, but that's, for ambulance, that's another whole
Yeah.
thing, and it's really, it's not my business. Well, it isn't. It's up to the voters of that precinct
Yeah.
and all these precincts to decide. It's not,
Sure, but it does seem as though we're heading, I mean, people talk about townwide fire forever, but with the Center Conway dissolving and East Conway codifying and all that, and this would be the next step to that, right? Okay, so we got to wrap it up. So on the warrant this year will be your recommendation, the committee's recommendation, and I'll say it could be for townwide fire, then you'll have to...
not fire,
I'm
ambulance.
sorry,
Ambulance, yeah.
ambulance, then you have to convince North Conway Precinct to buy in on that, and if that happened, then what? When would anything happen? The contract, you said, goes to 2026 anyway?
Right, and I think the reason that Paul D. and I made this suggestion to the Board of Selectmen about forming a committee of experts, of people who know that, is why wait until we hit 26 when, as you go through, because we're going to be to April for a vote, and even though it would be a non-binding referendum, I think you'll find out based on the vote whether it's a mandate or not. And I think then that's when you also say it's non-binding, but you would have community input. We'd have public hearings throughout 26. Or, you know,
25 or 26?
Well, if it passes in 25, I mean, I suspect around budget season you would have that for the, and you still have a whole year, but you know, the dissolution of the district in Conway took 2 years. It started when I first got here, and I think it was great that they took 2 years to make sure that we did it right.
So the contract of the ambulance goes through 26?
That's correct.
Okay, so
December
the next
31st.
year in there.
Yes.
Ray, any last words on this?
No, other than the fact that we do have a meeting on Tuesday at 1 o'clock upstairs in the town hall. And then after whatever we do, I would hope that maybe we could do an evening information
Good. Well, it's been a pleasure, guys. I think I understand it like another 3% before you got here, but it's complicated stuff.
Yep.
John, take care.
Yes, thank you, Mark.
Ray, take care.
Yep.
All right.